In light of the recent news that Kouji Mori will be the lead director of Berserk, I wanted to make a video talking about who he exactly is and the relationship he had with Miura. I can just simply say that the two were best friends, but that will be doing a greater disservice to the rich relationship the two shared over their lifetime. I think this is kind of like describing Guts and Griffiths' relationship as a simple rivalry. Everyone who has read Berserk knows how much more there is to the two's relationship. While Miura was notoriously a very private person, like geez, there's only like 5 photos of him, Mori has always been very open about his private life. He has partaken in numerous public events, and he has even made a number of TV appearances. Over the course of several interviews, Mori has gone into great detail about what he and Miura did together before they became prominent manga artists. And let me tell you, this story is insane. If you're a Berserk fan, you do not want to miss out on hearing this, as it would make you completely change how you see the entire story of Berserk. If you are a hardcore Berserk fan, you are probably already aware that the Band of the Hawk was loosely based off of Miura's friend group in university, and that the scene where Guts left the Band of the Hawk was inspired by the time he dropped out of his art course to focus on his career as a manga author. But there is a little bit more nuance to the story. One particular person in this college group was almost like a Griffith type figure to him. Just like the story between Guts and Griffith, the relationship between Miura and this person was one with great depth and complexity, where the two shared many great memories as well as spurts of jealousy and regret towards each other. You may have even heard this person's name, as he also ended up as a successful manga author, creating notable works like Holy Land and Suicide Island. And you guessed it, this person's name was Kouji Mori. Kouji Mori was born on the 28th of November 1966, the same birth year as Miura. He was bigger and taller than most of the kids his age, and he excelled at sports in his younger days. At one point in time, he even qualified for the Little League division in baseball. His parents really pushed and encouraged him to continue playing sport, but deep down, Mori's real passion was to draw manga. When he got to middle school, he admitted to his parents that he wanted to quit playing baseball outright, but he didn't have the courage to say, "I want to be a manga author," because he knew his parents would have been extremely opposed to it. His parents told him that he could stop playing baseball as long as he went back to playing in high school. Mori verbally agreed, but deep down, he had no intention of doing so. He ended up enrolling into an arts-focused high school, and he didn't resume baseball as he had told his parents. This broken promise started what ended up being a long, troubled relationship between himself and his parents. But his decision to enroll into this arts-focused high school may have been one of Mori's most important life decisions. Mori recalls how on one of their first days of school, he noticed a classmate quietly drawing something on his notepad. He peeped over and looked at what he was drawing. It was a sketch of Zaku, one of the mechas from Gundam. This boy turned out to be Kentaro Miura. The two started to talk, and this began what turned out to be a lifelong friendship, spanning multiple decades. Despite their shared love of reading and drawing manga, the two's backgrounds couldn't have been any more different. Miura grew up in a very artistic household. His father's job was to draw storyboards for commercials, and his mother was an art teacher. Miura recalls, "So even when I was little, I would sit in the corner of art classes and draw. Soon, I began wanting to become a manga artist." Mori later admitted that he was a little bit jealous of Miura's background because it seemed to him that Miura was born into the perfect circumstance to become a manga author. After this first meeting, the pair immediately became close friends. Since he didn't feel comfortable drawing manga at his own home, Mori began to regularly visit Miura's household after school to draw manga together. Mori recalls how on one particular night, the two snuck into an abandoned apartment building with a bottle of alcohol. He describes how they drank and said out loud, "One day, we will become manga artists." On top of their love for manga, the two also had a shared interest in sci-fi stories. It's no secret that Miura loves Star Wars, as he has referenced it in Berserk a number of times. Mori recalls how one day, in their third year of high school, The pair were sitting inside of a local movie theatre, watching previews and waiting for the film to start. While waiting, the trailer for Star Wars Episode 6 began. Mori describes how out of nowhere, Miura, who was usually very calm and collected, shouted out at everyone in the audience, "Oi, shut up, be quiet." This love for science fiction ended up connecting with their love for manga, as their first collaborated work was a sci-fi story. When Miura was asked what was the first story he submitted to a publisher, he responded, "I think my first one was Weekly Shonen Sunday. Mori-kun and I co-authored a piece, which we sent, but it got shot down in the last round of selections. It was a sci-fi piece. Those were popular back then." Although Miura has described himself in previous interviews as a stupid kid, Mori stated that while he himself was a delinquent, barely scraping school, Miura was an honest student, who never did anything bad and had a very respectable mind. Mori further described that Miura had an impressive ability to fully concentrate on one task, like he was able to darken out everything apart from what he was focusing on. He says this aspect of Miura really made him feel like he was witnessing a genius at work. However, this respect towards one another was far from one-sided. Miura once stated, "Come to think of it, Mori-kun played a huge part in my life. He was like a Johnny's lead singer. He was popular with the girls and a bit naughty, getting into fights and such, but he was serious about becoming a manga artist, so he left his delinquent-infested hometown to start over at art school." Since Mori visited Miura's household so regularly, combined with the fact that things weren't going so well at his own home with his parents, Miura's family eventually said to him, "If you're having trouble with your parents that much, why won't you live here?" Mori ended up living in Miura's house for a short period of time. "We would go to school together, come back home together, and we'll say, 'Okay, let's draw manga,'" Mori recalls. However, things didn't stay this way forever. Mori didn't want to abuse this privilege, so he eventually moved out of Miura's house. But since he didn't want to stay at his own home either, he began to wander around town until the early hours of the morning, getting into street fights and causing trouble. Mori describes his university days as his lowest and darkest time. When he was around 20 years old, he began to feel a decline in the quality of his manga. He recalls how it began to feel like every single work he was submitting ended up being heavily criticized or outright rejected. Things really fell apart for him when he was told by one publisher, "Stop writing the story, we'll think of it ourselves." This led Mori to get into a very long slump. Around this time period, things weren't that much better for Miura either, as most of his works were also being rejected. The two fell into darkness. What are we going to do now? The two wondered. This dark period definitely affected Mori more, as he recalls how he couldn't draw anymore, no matter how hard he tried. As a way to vent out his frustration, Mori kept wandering around town at night, and he got into even more street fights. He says at this point in his life, every day was a repeat of fight and get arrested. The two's relationship really met a turning point around this time period. After Mori had proofread one of Miura's rejected works, he felt that if Miura sent his story, which was a sci-fi manga, to a more niche publisher, it would definitely get accepted. However, Mori felt very conflicted about telling Miura this. He didn't want to be in a situation where Miura would be accepted, while his work continued to be rejected. He hated the thought of seeing his best friend succeed, while he himself kept failing. But eventually, Mori's care for his friend got the better of him. He told Miura to send his work into a sci-fi publisher. This turned out to be amazing advice, at least for Miura. His work did end up being accepted, and it began to get serialized. And Miura even got a job to work as an editor for Sho Fumimura, the writer of Fist of the North Star. This completely shocked Mori, and it caused him to spiral into darkness more and more. I was shocked. Honestly, I became jealous. I felt I shouldn't have told him. Eventually, Miura's work began to be shelved at more and more bookstores. Mori stated that at one point, he saw his manga at every single bookstore he went to. I couldn't get myself to read his manga. Even though I didn't read it, I got the sense it is selling really well. This really choked me up, and I felt dizzy. We had been best friends since we were 15, and to see him reaching success made my situation feel a lot worse. I couldn't go to bookstores anymore. Everything just seemed so dark. I couldn't handle the thought that this feeling would continue, even tomorrow. When asked how he rebounded from this dark place, Mori responded, "I almost died in a motorcycle accident when I was 25. When he was in his mid-20s, after abandoning his dream, Mori worked as a commercial illustrator. One day when he was returning home after working at an F1 event, he crashed into a truck, which led him to fly off his bike and get run over by another car. While he was being rushed to the emergency room, he told himself, 'I am going to die from this.' He even heard the doctors and paramedics around him saying, 'He won't make it.' And it was during those severe moments when he faced death, Mori thought to himself, 'Right now, Miura is probably working on his manga.' He continued this train of thought by realizing, 'I should have bounced back and drawn manga like Miura did.' He felt a deep sense of regret and said to himself, 'If I somehow survive, I will challenge myself to become a manga author again.' By some miracle, his surgery did succeed, and he proceeded to make a full recovery. It took him 2 years to leave his job position, but he kept his word. When he was 28 years old, he grabbed his pen and carried on his childhood passion. Beforehand, I couldn't even draw one panel, but all of a sudden, it all came back to me. I was so happy since for 8 years, I didn't draw any manga." There is an old saying in Japanese which states, "Baka wa shinanakia naoranai," meaning, an idiot can only recover once they die. Mori states that he realized how true the saying was after his accident. This led Mori to meet great success as a manga author, creating very highly acclaimed works like the aforementioned Holy Land and Suicide Island, with Holy Land even getting a live-action drama adaptation. He finally, in some way, got closer to Miura. You may have already identified some parallels between these events and Guts and Griffiths' relationship. As mentioned earlier, Miura described Mori to be like a Johnny's lead singer, Johnny's being a Japanese boy band, and that he was popular with the girls and that he got into street fights and such. This sounds similar to Griffith in the way he was admired and immediately respected by others. According to Mori, a couple of Griffith's dialogues are a direct transcription of some of the stuff he told Miura when they were both teenagers. When he was further asked what specific Griffith quote was originated by him, Mori quickly said, "It's too embarrassing." There is also another interesting parallel in the way Mori envisioned Miura during his time in the emergency room, when he was on the verge of life and death. This is extremely similar to the scene in which we saw Griffith locked up in the Tower of Rebirth. During this time, the only thing which retained Griffith's consciousness was the thought of Guts. But above all, perhaps the most noteworthy thing is that Mori and Miura's relationship, much like the bond between Guts and Griffith, was a very complicated and emotional one. While the two obviously had shared so many great moments together, they had both admitted that there had been times in which they were both jealous of each other. When asked whether Mori had a magnetic personality, Miura stated, "He did. It actually made it hard to be normal friends with him. He was so awesome that if I didn't stay away from him, he would dwarf me. I didn't like my options, so I fought back the only way I could, which was to keep working on manga." Although I have explained these events suggesting that Griffith represents Mori and that Guts represents Miura, in a certain interview, Miura perfectly summarized his relationship with Mori in a very comprehensible way. When the interviewer commented that his relationship with Mori sounds like Guts and Griffith, Miura replied, "That was actually the inspiration, but sometimes I would be Guts and sometimes I would be Griffith. It's probably something that happens a lot in guys' relationships." This simple sentence perfectly summarizes so much about the two's relationship. Sometimes I would be Guts, and sometimes I would be Griffith. The two started off as great friends with a common interest, but as they grew up, they realized their differences, and they even began to feel envious towards each other. As they got older, these differences began to be highlighted more and more, and one of them seemed to have overtaken the other, while the other one sat there, left behind. Earlier on in this same interview, Miura stated, "I have a pet theory. If you can't think of your own personal history as a story, you can't become a manga artist." Miura calls this a pet theory, but at least in his own work, it is certainly true. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you are already enough of a die-hard Berserk fan to know that so much of Guts' adventures parallels with Miura's life, and he incorporated his own personal struggles and experiences into the story of Berserk. This is certainly the same case with Mori, and from my perspective, it is much more obvious. Mori also incorporated his own dark, personal struggles into his manga to create some very deep and emotional stories over his career. Nearly all of his work includes a theme of existential issues, where the main cast of characters go through a struggle of internal conflict. Suicide Island is a psychological seinen manga set in a remote, abandoned island where a group of failed suicidals are sent to. The story is about how the main character's motivations to live completely changes when they are put into a completely unfamiliar environment. While the reviews aren't that great, it's one of my personal favorite mangas of all time, because it really questions what it means to be human and the meaning of life. Mori's most famous work, Holy Land, follows the story of Yu Kamishiro, a high schooler who feels alienated and secluded from everyone around him. However, he finds a sense of purpose and fulfillment by fighting out in the streets. And as mentioned earlier, Mori was no stranger to street fighting either. In this regard, there is one particular scene in Holy Land which stands out. There is one scene in which Yu, after feeling completely distraught, stands off the ledge of a building, contemplating whether to jump off or not. Mori admitted he once did the exact same thing. When Mori was in his dark place, when he felt completely discouraged after seeing his best friend succeed so much, he tried to take out his own life. I stood at the rooftop of a building, like Yu did. I did something terrible the night before, and I thought to myself, I don't want this to continue. But at the end, I got very scared, and I couldn't jump off and die. And it wasn't just Miura who incorporated his friend into his manga. Mori has stated that certain aspects of Yu's character was inspired by Miura. Yu's ability to fully concentrate on his fighting was inspired by the aforementioned way Miura was able to focus on drawing manga. When you understand the history between these two, you gain a different outlook on the announcement that Mori will continue Berserk. The two went through so many ups and downs together over their lifetime, and this is most likely the final thing Mori will do to help out his deceased friend. In some ways, I see this action as Mori giving back to his friend, who changed his life during the time he faced death. Some people will say that Berserk ended on chapter 364, which is the last chapter that Miura directly contributed to. Whether this is true or not is a topic for another day, but I am personally in full support of Mori completing Miura's masterpiece, which is Berserk.